Hello everyone, welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himbar, and today I have an exciting video for you. So this is going to be my first time experiencing Joanna Russ. Essentially, I actually made a couple of these videos, but it's been quite a long time. I made them over 2 years ago, back near the beginning of my channel. I did one for Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith. This is essentially my way of saying this is my first time reading this author, and they mostly wrote short stories. Now, Joanna Russ did write some novels that are actually decently popular. I just don't have copies of them, and so I found a short story of hers online, and I decided I'm going to read that and make a video on it. And so I actually read one story. Now, if you remember in my Clark Ashton Smith video, my Robbie Howard one, I read several stories. I read a whole collection of stories. In this case, I read one story online as A Game of Vlet. This is a 1974 story. It was published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And it was actually the story of the week from the Library of America back, I think, late last year sometime. Brian Collins on the Whetstone Discord shared this link actually, and I hadn't read anything by Russ, so had to kind of jump on it. I've talked about short stories on my channel a lot, but the likes of something like King Crusoe's short story Sundays and the fellow at The Worst Thing About New Books, um, they kind of inspired me to talk about another one in just one dedicated video, right? I like short stories, as any watcher of the channel can tell, and it's what I write. Even I write short stories, but I rarely dedicate a video to one. But again, experiencing Joanna Russ for the first time, and it's by a single short story. And so I've actually read a story with a Russ character in it, right? That is The Two Besties, and Linkmar features Alex. I think she might be called the Picklock. In that story, I don't know. The Adventures of Alex. That's like the Alex collection, right, by Joanna Russ. But again, she appears in this like Fafhrd and Grey Master story, just kind of making a cameo. And apparently, I'll link the Library of America post because they link the story in their post, but they also give some background. Samuel R. Delany was apparently inspired by this story and the game Vlet to write his Trouble on Triton and his later Neveryon books. So the opening, so this is a quote from him. I think this is his introduction to the Adventures of Alex. Actually, it says the opening two tales are the swordiest of sword and sorcery. The third is only a few dials and traveling spotlights away from the most sorceress. And despite its dials, lights in the world machine, it certainly doesn't feel like the science fiction. In the novel, when our pre-civilized heroine is transported into the future, we have a tale that does feel like science fiction. And the closing novella, while its surface demands to be taken as science fiction, keeps on evoking feelings that tend to view our reading of it toward a psychological fantasy. The largest break with the sword and sorcery tradition is, of course, that there are women in Russ's tales. Possibly, an even larger break is that there is at least one, and that is what Sword and Sorcery banishes entirely from its landscape, husband, in the series. So I haven't actually read The Adventures of Alex, and for some reason, that collection does not include this story, A Game of Let. So while I look for a copy of that still, I'm glad I get a tasting of it now that's not even included in that for some reason. Though maybe the Rust stuff from Library of America, I think, would include A Game of Let, so maybe I'll look for that for completion's sake. But the story itself, okay, it's really short. It's like 11 pages, I think, about 4,000 words or something like that. It's set in Ord or Orth. I'm not sure how they. Urdh. That DH can make a TH sound in some cases, like Ethelon in Middle Earth. Anyways, it's the city that is ruled by a governor, right? And so the story basically starts with someone coming to talk to the governor, and he's like, I want to play a game of Vlet with the governor. And the guards are like, no, you want to assassinate him, obviously. And he's like, no, I want to play a game of Vlet. Like, this is, and he gives an analogy. Actually, he compares how there's this certain type of magical mirror that it's like forged in darkness. So the first time it ever sees light, you're able to look anywhere in the world, and then it shatters, right? And he did a similar thing. So he's got a bunch of people with him, right? And he says like this contortionist like acrobat over here carved the pieces with his feet, right? So it's never been, the game board and pieces have never been touched by human hands, right? Or just the way it's handled by like a bunch of people like that, like a bunch of people who are missing one hand, or like one woman who's deaf, and so when she was like pounding some metal, like it was never heard by human ears, type of thing. So it's kind of silly. And then they meet a lady though, basically, who's saying to the guards, "Oh, let him in," basically. But and then she says to this guy, like, "You're not going to play the governor. You're going to play me instead." And this game of Vlet, right, since it's never been touched by human hands, is kind of like this mirror. It lets you actually control the world, the outcome of the world, by playing this game, which is ironic because I just started reading The Player of Games by Ian M. Banks today, which is a little different, but kind of close in some ways. And so he kind of has like this idea of revolution, and she seems to be playing the people in status, the people in control, right? And so, but it's also very obvious the lady's not a lady. It tells us that at the very beginning, basically, when it introduced her. She's not a lady, right? She's looks kind of like a lady, but it's a hasty disguise. That's what it's described to us as. This is Alex, of course. It actually never says that though. Never says that, right? So, but she's interesting because she talks about the governor, calls the governor sweetie and stuff like that. And the governor's piece on Vlet is essentially like the king in chess. This game is very similar to chess, right? There's elephants, there's archpriests, and there's common people. Now, the other guy she's going against seems to have just a bunch of common people. So there's a common uprising. There's like a revolution, right? And it's interesting because then you can see it like happening, right? You can hear this game being played, but you can also know that's happening, right? For example, he's like, "I want to play a clean game," and that means you don't kill pieces. You I can't remember, like you make them surrender or something like that, because he doesn't want actual people to die in the streets, right? And then also, like, for example, when she reaches down to move a piece on the board, and these pieces are kind of moving around on their board anyway, so she's having a hard time controlling them. She sees like her giant hand in the sky or something like that, right? Or when he says something, his voice booms throughout the city, right? And so it's like really cool, visually, right? And it blends really well together. So you have this kind of like micro and macro thing going on. But in the end, right, she wins. It's obvious that she's not actually trying to sustain the status quo, right? At the very end, because I'm just going to spoil it real quick for you, she tied up the governor and his actual mistress, which is who she was dressed like. And so she's obviously just a thief who was doing something in the palace when this guy showed up, right? And just went along with it. And so, but also we have this like really poignant closing remark, basically, that says it's not possible essentially to get by without cheating, right? And so that to me seems like is it either cheating the system, or is it cheating as part of the system, right? Like that you cannot survive in the system without cheating, or that you need to cheat the system so much and get a new system, hence the revolution thing. But the revolution fails in a sense, you know what I mean? So it's an interesting thing. Joanna Russ is an interesting character. She's definitely what you describe as a feminist character. I think she's known as a new edge sci-fi, new edge, wow, new wave. I'm reading too much sword and sorcery. She is a sword and sorcery writer. There's Alex stories, right? But mostly a science fiction one, right? Talking about sexuality and feminism, and stuff like that. She wrote, let's see, well, she came out as lesbian after releasing the Female Man in 1975, which is the year after this story. And Picnic on Paradise was another one of her things. I think that might be The Adventures of Alex, though. Not 100% sure, but I think it might just have Picnic on Paradise. That's right. It's one of the stories that's included in The Adventures of Alex, which I think is its own separate novel, though. And some of the stories are shorter, right? But she's an interesting character. She's pretty like angry, right? That's how she describes herself, essentially. She says she doesn't trust people who aren't angry, at least ones who are writing stuff like she does. And she, for example, Wikipedia will tell you she gave a bad review or something like Donaldson's Lord Falsbane, right? And this is like a little, she says, these are taken directly from the cited article. It says, "Don't shove your politics into your reviews, just review the books." And she says, "I will, when authors keep politics out of their books." And then they say, "You don't prove what you say, you just assert it." And then she says, "There's no way to prove anything in aesthetic or moral matters." And then they say, "Then your opinion is purely subjective." And she says, "I might be subjective, but not arbitrary. It is based on a critic's whole education." And then everyone's entitled to his own opinion. She says, writing is a craft too, and it can be judged, and some opinions are worth a good deal more than others. They say, I knew it, you're a snob. And she says, science fiction is a small world that often doesn't look outside of its own bounds. And they say, you're vitrolic too. And then she says, the only way to relieve oneself of the pain that has to be endured by reading every line is to express one's opinion vividly, precisely, and compactly. And they say, never mind all that stuff. Just tell me what I'd enjoy reading. She says, bless you, what makes you think I know? It's just very interesting. But obviously very influential on someone like Samuel R. Delany, who was already writing at the time. But I guess, I mean, you wrote a couple books based off that stuff. I actually have the Never Yawn, some of the Never Yawn stuff for Sword and Sorcery, which I've been meaning to read. Haven't had it that long though. Or just an interesting first exposure to Joanna Russ. Not an author I hear talked about on BookTube like really at all, and just it's just a singular story, right? I don't have anything. I really want to read the adventures of Alex and the Female Man actually too. But we'll see when either of those happen. Let me know if you've read anything by Joanna Russ and if you can recommend it to me. And again, like I'll link the Library of America link down below where you can read the story yourself and experience it. So anyways, Liam from Liam's Lyceum. I will catch you next time.